Note from the publisher. Having republished a body of doctrinal and practical divinity and the cause of God and truth by Dr. John Gill, along with the sermons of Tobias Crisp, we note that John Gill quotes often from Dr. Ames in his works, and for this reason we have made the Marrow of Sacred Divinity available for the reader of today. We have included a list of words and sought out the spellings to make it much easier to read. Biography of William Ames. Dr. William Ames was born in 1576 at Ipswich in Suffolk, that region east of Anglia where Puritanism had first begun and where the persecution of the crown was least effective. His father was a merchant who was sympathetic to the Puritan cause. His mother was a relative of later colonists, pilgrims of Plymouth, Massachusetts. Both his parents died, and William was taken in by his uncle, Robert Snelling of Oxford, who took William into his home and with understanding and generosity saw to his needs and education. Ames chose the centre of Puritan learning, Cambridge University, over Oxford for his higher education. Cambridge was denominated during Elizabethan and Jacobean time by the teaching and preaching of Thomas Cartwright, 1535 to 1603, William Perkins, 1558 to 1602, and John Preston, 1587 to 1628. Ames had the good providence to become close to William Perkins, and their relationship not only grew as teacher-student but also as friends. Ames received a A.B. degree in 1607 and was promptly invited to become a fellow professor of Christ College. He was even in the running for the mastership of the college as a successor to Edmund Burwell in 1609, but higher authorities in state and established church interfered to prevent the election of such a strong nonconformist candidate. Ames refused to wear vestments, and he spoke out against the sign of the cross administered during baptism and other ceremonies. Another candidate was chosen, and in the eyes of Ames and other Puritans the college status deteriorated. Ames withdrew his fellowship and never returned again to English academia. Ames made the transition from being a fellow to taking up the pastorate, but he was not long afterwards that persecution began to intensify under the reign of James I and Archbishop Bancroft. Particularly, Ames was sought after since he had translated William Bradshaw's treatise English Puritanism, which set forth the hard terms of the nonconformist views. Ames made a decision to leave England and go to Holland. Ames arrived in Holland in 1610 to begin a new life that would bring him fame, conflict, the death of his first wife, financial insecurity, continued interference from the English authorities, and his own death at the age of 57. During the first years of exile, Ames supported himself by offering his ministerial service to one of the several large communities of Englishmen living in the Netherlands. Ever since the Marian persecution of the 1550s, English nonconformist ministers in exile had always been able to find professional employment, although usually at a bare subsistence level. Supported by Colonel Horatio Vere, a Puritan sympathiser, Ames succeeded John Burgess in 1611, the same year as the King James Version was published for the second time, as chaplain to the British community at The Hague. Ames courted Burgess's daughter and married her, but she died soon after and left him childless. The long arm of bishop and king reached across the North Sea, and Vere was forced to dismiss Ames in 1618. His professional life continued to be precarious until his appointment to a professorship at the Young University in Frankfurt in North Holland. Although his recommendation in 1619 by the Synod of South Holland was enthusiastically received by the trustees of the new Friesland University, Ames was not able to deliver his inaugural address until 1622. The English authorities spared no effort to prevent his taking the post, and would likely have been successful if it had not been for the direct intervention of the Dutch Prince Maurits. Despite this array of personal misfortune and difficulty, Ames voiced his still one of the most influential in the theological development of the Puritan and Reformed churches in England and the Netherlands. From discussion of church polity with John Robinson, he turned to dispute with continental theologians. The points of argument were all related to Arminianism, the great theological heresy of the 17th century. Very soon after his arrival in Holland, Ames enlisted on the side of the Orthodox party, which was standing its ground against the position of the late Jacobius Arminius, 1560-1609. The Arminians, or Remonstrants as they were better known, opposed the rigid Calvinism of the Dutch Reformed churches, a rigidity also shared among the English Puritans. The Remonstrants argued two main points: that the human will played a significant, if not a controlling role in salvation, and that Christ died for all men, not just the elect. On the second point, Arminius had made a special attack on theory of predestination held by William Perkins, Ames's respective Cambridge tutor. Ames did battle in several tracts with Jan Uttensberg, Simon Epicurus, and especially Nicholas Gavinschovian, the influential Remonstrant minister in Rotterdam. The Coronis ad Collationem Hagiensem, or a finishing touch to the Hague Conference, published in 1618 as a strong affirmation of the Orthodox ministers, presented forcibly the Amesian answer to the Remonstrants. In the winter of 1618 to 1619, the whole Arminian conflict came to a climax during the Synod of Dort, to which the Reformed theologians came from Holland, England, France, Switzerland and Germany. Ames served as a consultant to the moderator of the Synod, which finally condemned Arminian theology. Ames was thought to be some sort of giant killer in theological debate. What disturbed him about the Remonstrants was their failure to give the sovereignty and working power of God a primary place in theology. They had, in his mind, placed the Almighty at the beck and call of man. For this they surely deserved censure. Ames began his work as professor of theology
Franeker
at in 1622. These were his most productive years. During the span of years he taught at this university, he continued to write against the Arminian crisis, although he was sympathetic to those who were being led astray by false doctrine. Late in 1620s, he decided he should leave the university for the New World. Ames had received correspondence from his friends in the New World to join them and endeavour there to be a pastor and teacher, school or academic head, but William Ames was never to sail for New England. He instead ended up in Rotterdam in 1632 to answer a call from an independent congregation, so co-minister with his friend Hugh Peter. The church planned to open a school, having Ames as their head and master, but in 1633 the River Maes flooded and the homes of the church members as well as Ames. Ames was exposed to cold water and cold air and contracted a high fever, which his weakened heart could not stand. Medicine and doctors were of no avail. His family and friends watched his courageous spirit endure to the end, which was just a few days later. Thus, he who was the greatest influence on early America never arrived there. He may have been the first president of Harvard instead of Thomas Shepard, but, come what may, were not part of God's ordained plan for his life. According to Daniel Neal, the first furniture at Harvard was the books of Ames, the famous professor of divinity at Franeker. He was of such profound influence upon the theology of New England that he was quoted more than Luther, Calvin combined. Jonathan Edwards often began with a thought of the Franeker professor. If you would like a hard-printed copy of William Ames' The Marrow of Sacred Divinity, please email us at nbpttc@yahoo.co.uk.